Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the invite, Rich, to speak here. Yeah, just a quick overview of my background. So I've been in medical devices for, a little over 30 years now. So all different kinds of devices, everything from lasers, dealt with a lot of critical components for intraocular lenses, and also a lot of software. But yeah, so I was in industry, and then the previous 4 years, I went into consulting and did US, but also a lot of global as well. So I can also give some perspective on both the EU and rest of world. So, but now I have a new role doing regulatory for Radformation, which we do cancer treatment planning software tools, basically to streamline and make processes more efficient for radiology oncology. So, yeah, so that's a little bit about that. Also, I did want to, just to set expectations, medical startups, we are going to be talking about medical devices rather than, not really going to touch on pharma or biologics in this one. Except in the context, of course, a little bit having to do with when we start talking about, when we touch on combination products. So with that, first thing I want to do is kind of look at where do you want to go to market. So the global market for medical devices is still, the big market for it is still the US. So this is the numbers from 2023. You can see that the North America has about 46.6% of the market, with the EU following it at 26.4%. And then we also have the next one over is at 6.6 is China, and as well as Japan. And then the rest of the world is 15.5. So when you're starting out and you're kind of looking at where you're going to go, obviously US, especially if you're probably already based, assuming you're already based in the US. And we're going to talk about some other things that right now, it keeps going back and forth, whether it's easier to do US or to do like the EU. But yeah, it's kind of, I think it's kind of gone back towards that's easier here in the US. So, and that works out since it is the biggest market. Now the rest of the world, which includes, in this particular slide, we're looking at South America, we're looking at Africa, Middle East, we're looking at Australia and New Zealand. Now, those are your growth opportunities. Later down on the line, you will be looking at that. So I know it seems like it's a bit early to talk about global, but you actually already want to start mapping out your strategy, because you want to really plan on, you have to know what all the requirements are, because there may be some things that you can take care of now that will prepare you for when you want to go bigger and into other markets. Also, like for instance, software. Your distribution is much easier than like for hardware. So you may be thinking about distributing software globally much faster than you would, say, hardware. So anyways, so that's why the focus of my presentation is going to be on US. But I'm going to, again, I will touch on the others. First, the definition of a medical device, because that comes up a lot, especially with software, but also we're running there's lots of different kinds of devices, and just because they're used in healthcare, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily a medical device. So the definition of a medical device basically is, instrument, apparatus. The definition kind of started with, everything used to be just hardware. But basically you're looking at that is intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals, or that it's intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals. and that it doesn't achieve its primary intended purpose through like chemical action. So for instance, pharmaceuticals. So in this particular case, this is the definition from FDA, and they have recently included addressed software. So specifying that there are some software functions, like for instance, healthcare records, for instance, electronic healthcare records systems that are not considered medical device, even though they are used in a healthcare setting. So as far as the different kinds of devices, we have the different categories: general wellness, which usually that doesn't have a very high bar from a regulatory standpoint. We have aesthetic, diagnostic, therapeutic, combination products. And then under software, you have software as a medical device, and then mobile medical applications. And then under diagnostic, something that's new is so laboratory developed tests, where a laboratory has its own tests, and they're doing the test just in a single lab. That was not really, that was kind of a gray area, but that's going to come under more enforcement. There are some court cases going through the system right now, so we'll see how that plays out. But there's going to be more regulations expected for LDTs. So that would fall under diagnostic. So the medical device classification scheme in the US is basically all your classification types are based on the level of risk. So we have class 1 is the lowest. That's kind of your bandages and tongue depressors and that sort of thing, your manual stethoscope. Class 2 is medium risk. This is actually an electronic stethoscope would actually be considered class 2. Infusion pumps are they're kind of medium high risk, but they're still in class 2 because they're, I think because some of it else has to do with how well the technology is understood, how well the risks are understood. And then class 3 is your high risk devices, and that tends to be implants. And then there's a few other things that fall under that, but the most common type of device generally falls under class 2. So.
Can we do questions on the fly?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I have a question about the slide before. What body put in place those definitions? What body put in place those definitions?
So this one's the US.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, this was classification in the US. And later on, we'll go through different countries have different classification schemes. So this one is just US. But yeah, it's from FDA. So the regulatory pathways here in the US for the different classes are, so class 1 being low risk is generally exempt. It's exempt from what's called pre-market notification. So generally you just need to do a device listing and then you can already go to market. You may need to, we'll talk about other requirements like needing to have a quality system. But for some of them, they're exempt from that. Now, there is a class of class 1 devices that is considered reserved, and where you do actually have to do a 510K, a pre-market notification. So just like you would have to do for a class 2. There's not a whole lot of them, but for instance, patient exam gloves is one of them. And then class 2 is the most common one you hear about is the 510Ks, your 510K pre-market notification. And that one is based on that there's already a device like it out there, and you're basically comparing to it, and you're making the case for that. Generally you will have to do some additional things to show, there's going to probably be some differences, and you'll have to do some testing and do some show equivalency, basically. And we'll go through basically the contents that are required for that in a little bit. And then for class 3, it's a pre-market approval where there's no predicate and it is high risk. So that's a pretty big undertaking to do a PMA. It's usually have a team of people tackling that, and it takes a long time. There's clinicals for sure involved in that. Now we have another situation where maybe you have something that doesn't have a predicate, but it's not high risk, and so it can be either class 1 or class 2, but we're not sure yet. So the FDA will be making a determination when you submit what's called a de novo classification request. It used to be that what you first would do would be, you didn't have a predicate, so you do a 510K and try to do it anyways, and then FDA would say, nope, you can't go that way, so it's class 3, and then you would do a de novo classification request. Now you can just go straight to de novo. And then basically you're making a case where you're going to do a benefit risk analysis, where you're going to show that your risk profile fits that. So just kind of quickly review the pre-market authorization terminology, because a lot of people will say, oh, my device is approved. Probably not. It's probably cleared. 510Ks are cleared, PMAs are approved, and de novos are granted. So that language is kind of important with you have to be careful when you're doing your marketing literature, your promotional materials, and how you do your claims. Especially FDA actually doesn't like you to say something's FDA cleared. It's okay to put down your 510K number, but they don't want to give the impression that they're authorizing or promoting your device. So you have to be kind of careful with that. But when you do use that kind of terminology, this is what you would use.
That's the first thing they'll ask you though, is this approved by the FDA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now you know how to answer that.
Yeah.
We're cleared. So one of the first things you have to tackle is hopefully there's already a predicate out there, because it's much faster and cheaper than if you have to do it all from scratch. So you want to see first if your product type is out there. So there's a database where you can look up your product code, which is also linked to a regulation number, which will give you all the information that you need to know what your regulatory path is going to be. So just as an example here, I typed in infusion pump for my device, and this is what it gave me. 22 results, and you can see here over on the left is your product code, and then you see all the different device types, and with the regulation number, and with the device class. So these are ones that have already been determined to be a specific classification. So you know that if you're doing an infusion pump that falls under that, you click on the regulation number, make sure that your device fits that description. That's class 2.
So would it can a device fall in multiple categories, or is that?
Yes, it can.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a bad thing? Because then you have to have several different applications, or is it?
The only thing that I think maybe could happen is you might have to do a little bit more testing, but that does happen. And a lot of times what happens is if there's already a device that has multiple, and the one that I know for sure that falls under is patient exam gloves. You have your basic glove, but then you also have your ones for chemotherapy, for instance, and that's actually a different code. And if you have one that can where you can handle fentanyl, that's yet another code. And the FDA, you don't have to get it right the first time. You need a product code in order to build your submission. But if there's another product code that it needs, the FDA will work with you on that. So you don't have to worry about that too much. But a lot of times, your predicate may have multiple, so you will also use those as well. And if it doesn't have it, so that's one thing about if you're going to Novo, if you have a new novel device that doesn't have a product code yet, FDA will be, that's part of the process. When you submit, is they're going to figure out what that.
So is that what
product code-
the Nova means? It's a new product altogether?
No, yep. If you go through the database and you look at everything and you do your research and, try to figure out what your device is and you're still not sure, you can get feedback from the FDA. There's two main routes. You can do option one, which is an informal inquiry. You'll email the device determination team and you basically, it's informal. So you just give them a description of your device, intended use, labeling claims, and have a discussion with them about it. You may want something more formal though, and there is a process for that, which is a request for information. It's called a 513G. And this one does have a fee. It's free to just email them and get an informal opinion, but if you actually need them to formally evaluate it, they do have a small fee for that.
Oh, why would you do that?
Yeah. So the reasons why you would do formal inquiry is if you want a higher level of confidence going in. So some of these things, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later too, you may have investors, you may have VCs that are helping fund, and they often will want a higher level of confidence going forward before they, invest further in it, or even decide to, that they want to invest. It gives them some confidence, knowing the regulatory pathway. That's why it's really important to do this like early on and know your strategy going in. And also for most of these, on the slides, I'll give a lot of, the references so that in case you need to look up the information. I do want to talk about the centers real quick. Who reviews what? So the devices are reviewed by the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, CDRH. Then there's also the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER, and for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER. And why I'm bringing that up is because a combination device, so you have a combination device like a pre-filled syringe. So you have the syringe, assuming it's a new syringe, and then also it's pre-filled. It already has a drug or a biologic in it. Who's going to review it? Is it going to be, CDRH, or is it going to be CDER, or if it's a biologic, CBER? So in the case of a pre-filled syringe, it will be, one of either the drug or the biologics. So that's important to know who your submission is going to go to.
Wouldn't it be both though? Wouldn't it be both? Like the syringe part would be done by the device and the drug part be the...
Well, the submission is just to one agency, but they will work with the other ones. They're working, the centers will work together.
Okay.
But there has to be one main one that's in charge.
Like the quarterback.
Yeah, so if you do have a combination product and you're not sure who will review, because they do have, I think there's I don't know if it's a guidance document or it's a page that FDA has some examples, so you can see if it fits. And if you're still not sure, you can do, this is a free program, you can do a request for designation or a pre-RFD, which is what I recommend because it's informal. There are two different guidances on how to prepare those submissions, but they'll work through and figure out which one it needs to go to. So basically, you just you give them, same thing, a complete description of the product, how it works, how the product will be marketed, that sort of thing. So there's guidances which actually, outline very well what you need to put in those submissions if you want to go that route. If you do go with the formal one, the RFD, it is binding. So if they say it's Sieber who's going to review it, then that's who's going to review it. Yeah, that can't be changed unless you report. Another useful program that FDA has is their Q submission program, where you can get all kinds of different feedback and information from them. You can do a pre-submission meeting request. So if you want to do a 510K, but you have some questions, which you probably will. Maybe you have questions about performance testing, or you have questions about, if you have to do a clinical protocol and you want them to review it. It's usually limited. It's usually 30 minutes to an hour. So you limit it to like around 4 questions usually. But it's a great program. It used to be you didn't want to, people were afraid to go to FDA, but it's like, no, FDA wants you to come with the questions ahead of time. It just makes the process, much more efficient for everybody. Because whatever issues they have, they're going to have them anyway. So you might as well get it figured out up front. So under the program, again, there's a guidance for this that shows you how to request these meetings, but there's all kinds. If you end up having, some feedback from your 510K that you have to work out, there's, meeting requests for that. There's other informational meetings. There's also a program, breakthrough device designation. If you have something that's, in great need, there's not a lot, it's solving a problem and there's a huge need for it. There's a special designation that it can get. And then during your development program, you can get more feedback from the FDA than you normally would. Sometimes investors like seeing that if you do have a product like that, because it means that you, they have a higher level of confidence that you can work through the issues. And so a related program under that is also the Safer Technologies program. So again, great resources because they are no cost. I mean, except for time.
Can you go over the PMA day 100 meetings?
I don't really do PMAs, so I don't know a whole lot about it.
That's fine.
Do you know what it stands for?
Well, pre-market approval.
A pre-market
So
approval.
It's definitely it's for the class 3. So there's it's its own thing.
So does that mean they're willing to do 100 meetings?
Mhm. Yeah.
While you're doing your PMA?
Yeah, I don't want to, like I said, I don't work.
No, I'm not.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Oh.
Again, they don't really want to wait until the end. So
A lot of meetings.
yeah. So since it's the most common one, we'll kind of go through what a 510K, what goes into a 510K pre-market notification submission. Nowadays, I think it's a little bit easier. They now have a PDF template. It's called eStar, and it's now mandatory. It used to be when they first came out and they were working out the bugs, it was voluntary, but it's now mandatory. You always want to check the FDA website for the latest template, but basically you download it. It's great because they had all these different forms for different things that you needed to go and, include in your submission, but it's actually all incorporated into this PDF now. So it's just a really nice template. And now they also have the option to do electronic submission and you don't have to FedEx it in anymore. So that's great. So the main kind of 510K is a traditional, is what it's called. There's also a special 510K, which is an optional pathway if it's if it's a device that already has a clearance, you've made some changes to it, they're enough that you need to do a 510K, but they're well defined, device modifications, and it has a faster review time. So once you have a product out there and you're making changes, you want to look and see how, which route you need to go. Do you need to do another traditional because it was big enough major changes, or were they minor enough to go special 510K? Fee applies, so this is a great time. A lot of people either don't know about it or haven't applied for it. It's a small business determination. Now so what's great about this is that you get, your fee either waived or reduced if you qualify. It's a little bit of a challenge sometimes for startups because you do need to give them your FDA, your tax return. So, but if you've just started out, you haven't filed your taxes yet. So what we encourage people to do is to go ahead and file anyways, even if it's like zero, just to have it so that you can do it, because it's a huge discount. Just in 2024 to 2025 fees, your standard 510K review would cost over $24,000, but the small business it's $6,000. So it's a huge discount. De Novo's even bigger. And if you're doing a PMA, I think for your first one, and if you're small enough, I think it's under 30 million, the first one's free. It's a good deal. Unfortunately, you also have to, before you go to market, you will do a facility registration. Unfortunately, they don't give you a discount for that, but the fees on these other things are higher, so at least there's that. So here's kind of a rundown on the content that you'll be providing in a 510K. Now, it depends on your device. So some of it's not going to be applicable, right? If you're doing a software product, you're definitely going to do your indications for use, device description in your substantial equivalence table. That's where you're showing how you compare to whatever predicate you chose. But things like sterilization and shelf life for software, biocompatibility, these are going to be, you're just going to have those as not applicable. See what else in clinical. So 510Ks, the idea behind them is that you shouldn't need clinicals, but for some of them you will still be presenting some clinical data. So, and then I'm not going to really get into that, but before you conduct the clinical study, you may need to consider applying for an investigational device exemption if it's significant risk. I'm just going to pull out a couple of the sections of a 510K that are worth discussing a little bit more. One of them is performance testing, bench testing. So this is dependent on the device type and what testing your predicate underwent. Some common types are mechanical testing, like fatigue, tensile strength, compression, and bench tests using ex vivo, in vitro, animal or human tissue. And then for some of them, like I was working on, it was a percutaneous catheter application, I think. And so, for certain ones, you may be looking at animal carcass or human, cadaver testing. So. And then also standards. So standards are voluntary, but you still have to have evidence of performance. So usually the easiest thing is to go ahead and use standards. there's sometimes you have tests that are, you have a particular device and there's a test that isn't available. And the thing is, you can use your own test, but then you have to validate it. So it's much easier if there already is a test out there that you can use, a standard that you can apply. It's better to go that way. And FDA has what's called consensus standards. These are standards where they will accept, performance reports against. So some common ones are for risk management. It's your ISO 14971. Software lifecycle processes is IEC 62304, and so on. They got them for all kinds of things. There's some of that are very device specific.
Is quality assurance during manufacturing embedded at all, or is that on you at that point after you get approved?
Yeah, I'll get into quality systems a little bit later, but yeah, that's definitely a part of it. You will be subject to inspection, but we'll kind of go through that because you might, you're very likely to probably try to apply for what's called 13485, ISO 13485 quality management system certification. And then you have to have all that in place. Yeah, we'll also talk about timing because that is one risk, is that people start their documentation late in the cycle. And, there's R&D, there's a gray area. You're doing R&D and you're trying to get to your, where you're ready to pull the trigger and say, okay, this is my device. This is what I'm going to go forward with and start, doing your testing. You need to make sure that you've done if you have to do design controls, if you have to do design documentation, you have to make sure you do that, start that early enough. Otherwise, there's so many people who get, close to going to market, they finally get their 510K and they're doing all this retroactive stuff, trying to get all their documentation in place. And that's not great. That's really hard on everybody. So, yeah, so we'll talk about it later, but there's also, if you globally, so like for instance, just taking, for instance, IEC 81001-5-1, which is essentially cybersecurity. Japan has its own standard, which is basically the same thing, but they've nationalized it, so it's a JIS standard. So depending on the country, you'll also be looking at these, but the consensus standards, the FDA has a very nice database with all the standards that they accept. So you can search for different standards. And this actually, I'm showing a slide. So this one, basically when you're looking up your product code, and there you see your regulation number. And then down there, if there's required consensus, or there's consensus standards that are being used, they'll have them at the bottom. They don't have, a lot of devices don't have that, so you're kind of looking at just what's the state of the art, what's generally done for that type of device out there, what testing did the predicate undergo? And this is the FDA's consensus database. So basically, you can either search by standards organization, or if you know the number, like you just type in 14971 and it'll show you that, and it'll show you the FDA recognition number. And you'll be putting that information into your 510K. And then you can, so I don't have a slide on it, but basically when you look up a standard, you can go into that entry and it will show you whether, what parts of it the FDA is recognizing. A lot of times it's full, but sometimes they'll just do a partial recognition. And it'll all state it there. And also if they're switching to a newer version of the standard, it'll have the date there, that, you know, when you have to switch over by, you know, so like if you're doing a 510K in November, you know, of this year, but, you know, they already are insisting on the new standard in October, the next version, then you have to make sure that you've done testing to that. Otherwise, they'll kick it back. The software documentation is another one. So it could be that your hardware device has software, or it could be that you have software-only device. So software is a medical device. So there's two different levels of documentation. It's basic or enhanced. But basically, you're going to give them the software description, risk management file, software requirements, architecture, the design specification, although that's not needed for basic, but you still want to have it as a part of your documentation. And configuration management maintenance practices, and V&V, verification and validation testing, and version history, and also unresolved software anomalies. If you have bugs, I mean, it depends on what the bugs are, but a lot of times you still do have some bugs. So, and that doesn't mean they're not going to grant, you know, that doesn't mean they're not going to clear it. So, but you do have to let them know what that is. A subset of all that is cybersecurity documentation, and this is an area that FDA has really ramped up with, in the last few years. So if your device can connect has the ability to connect to the internet at all, you need to have cybersecurity. So that means even if it doesn't go on the internet, but it has a USB port, you need to look at cybersecurity. So basically what they want to see for that is they want to see your threat model, architecture views, security risk assessment, which will be different than it's a different assessment from safety, because you can have security risks that aren't a safety risk, but you can also have security risks that are a safety risk. So you will have some that will fall over into the safety as well, but they are two different risk assessments. And then you're going to have your software bill of materials, vulnerability assessment, and software support. They are very much aware of platforms and when they are going end of life. So if you are going with an operating system that is only going to be around for another 1.5 years, and you're asking them to clear your device, they will be asking you about that.
So you can't build it on Windows 95 or anything.
No, that's kind of frowned upon these days. So there's, then, yeah, pen testing, you know, they want to see all that. Labeling also, yeah, vulnerability disclosures and other topics. So, yeah, definitely a lot more work these days to get all that documentation together. So, we had some questions about quality system. So FDA, the quality system regulation is, it's under 21 CFR. CFR is Code of Federal Regulations. It's part 820. There's other parts that you probably need to comply with, which I've listed there, like 803 for medical device reporting, corrections and removals is under 806, labeling is under 807. And then, and also one for electronic records and signatures is under 21 CFR Part 11. Coming up, we finally have some harmonization going on. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between, so in the EU, it's voluntary to have your quality system certified to 13485, but it's in a lot of cases, it's more work to not have it. So most companies will go the 13485 route if they plan on going anywhere outside the US. Now, there are a lot of similarities between that standard and Part 820, which is law. So that's the main difference between the two. One's a voluntary standard, and the other one's law. There's already a lot of similarities on it, but there's a few differences. But they're actually, FDA is incorporating ISO 13485 into the QSR, and the enforcement date for that will be February 2 of next year, 2026. Again, there's not a whole lot of differences, but the big one is there's a couple. One, that the risk management in 13485 is throughout your whole life cycle, through all your processes. It's not just, the product. Under Part 820, risk management isn't really, it doesn't come up too often, but it's throughout everything in 13485. And the other thing is a quality manual. It's actually not required under the Part 820 currently, but if you're 13485, you do have to have a quality manual.
Question.
Mhm.
Well, I remember previous products, so when we meet that standard, are they going to be grandfathered in, or do we have to update it, I guess?
You mean the quality system?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna want to, update it.
Okay.
Yeah, because the enforcement date is going to be, so yeah, if you're in the market, because you have, you still have processes that are ongoing, right? You have a device out there, but you're probably changing it. You're still manufacturing it. You have a bunch of post-market activities you have to do, right? Like, you're probably doing servicing, or you're handling complaints and that sort of thing. So you still want to, incorporate those into your quality system. So yeah, I'd recommend a gap analysis to see. You're probably not that far away, but you want to do a gap assessment and see.
On the slide previous, we talked about operating systems a little bit there. And if the software is an app running on an iPhone, how much of that can we push off onto Apple to say, Apple has very good security and no one can get into this phone because it's well designed?
Yep. Yeah, that's a common way to handle it. I'll talk a little bit about that, essentially outsourcing it. But yeah, so you will have to address it. A lot of the platforms have certification, and they have some documentation that you can leverage to show that. But yeah, you absolutely would incorporate that into your submission and explain that. Yeah, because you have to explain deployment anyways, how your product's getting out there. So yep, so you would just include that information on that. And they're well aware of that, like AWS, Apple, certainly. Apple has its own medical devices, so they're very aware of the need out there. Let's see. Yeah, so just kind of going through the basic quality system parts. Design controls. So your low risk devices generally don't need design controls. So you can save yourself a lot of work there. The product code will let you know what if it's exempt or not. Document controls, purchasing controls, that includes, managing all your suppliers, identification and traceability. It's a bigger deal on a class 3 device where you have to actually be able to track that part with the patient. Production and process controls, acceptance activities and non-conforming product. Corrective and preventative action is a big one. And that is actually the source of most of the findings out there that FDA has is is CAPA, is not having a robust enough system to track that and manage it. And then labeling packaging controls. Again, some of these things aren't going to apply like if you're doing software. You won't have much, for handling storage, distribution, installation. You may have just a little bit or not much at all. And then records, servicing, statistical techniques, and ISO will have I'll show the slide on ISO later, but they're in different places. They're packaged differently, but it's still a lot of the same stuff. So I thought I'd talk about the case where, because I know there's a lot of small startups probably, where you maybe have just two co-founders. Let's say you have just two co-founders and you're looking at this going, wow, I have to do a big quality system and do all that. Well, not if you've outsourced it. You can choose to outsource it. It could even be a hardware device. There's companies out there that will manufacture it for you. And depending on what they take on, you may not even do design controls if you bring them the idea and they're designing it and they're actually controlling that part, they'll handle that. But even if you've outsourced practically everything, there's still things that you're going to have to do. It's obviously not going to be as much activity as if you were, had 30 people or 200 people, or never mind a global company, but you will still need to have you still need to do your quality audits. You still have to do management reviews. You still have to have document controls. Definitely you have to have purchasing controls, because now you are really dependent on your supplier, on your contract, the subcontractor. So you definitely have to show control over the subcontractor. And you still want to have a CAPA system and have records. But in a lot of cases, the subcontractor, if you've outsourced it to another manufacturer, they'll handle things like, the ID and traceability and the production process controls and all these other things. So you can really reduce your workload. So it is possible to be a virtual manufacturer and be making a medical device. So a couple of other required activities for US. Once you are ready to go to market, you have to register your facility. So even if you're a software company, you have to have a place of business, and that's what you'll register. It's an annual registration. I think this year was like it was a little over 9,000. Yeah, they really, really increased it from last year. And then you're also going to list your device. There's a database where you'll add your device. And then there's also essentially barcoding, unique device identifier database. So you'll also be doing a UDI for your product. If it's software, it'll be on the splash screen. You'll still have a code on there. And then states may also have licensing registration requirements. Here in California, we have the California Department of Public Health, and they have registration requirement, and it's, in their case, it's renewable every 2 years. We also have something called the Medical Device Single Audit Program. So once you have a product out there, FDA will most likely at some point come in and inspect, to see how you're doing things. Are you in compliance with the regs? And what they came up with is there's 5 countries participating in this program where basically you have one single regulatory audit by a third party, but it's going to cover all the relevant requirements of the participating countries. And then there's an agreement in place where they will accept that audit report in lieu of an inspection, unless they have a cause to do an inspection. So the current MDSAP countries are the US, Canada, Australia, Brazil, and Japan. If you're going to Canada, it is the only one of these where it's mandatory. You have to actually do MDSAP if you're going to Canada. It's required for there. So, again, part of your regulatory strategy is deciding where you're going to go. And the nice thing about this, though, is that you can pick the country. So say you don't plan at all on going to Brazil or Japan, you can still do the MDSAP, participate with, do the audit program, but just not be audited against the requirements for Brazil and Japan. So it can be just for a subset of those countries. And then it's a little bit, because it is, so it'll reduce the fee also if you don't do all the countries. So the EU has a regulation in place now. It used to be the medical device directive, but now it's the medical device regulation. There's still a product on the market, probably until I think 2028 under MDD, but MDR is replacing it. So this is basically, it's CE, you've probably heard of CE marking. So where the product has gone through review process, but this is third party. So the difference is here, FDA, in the US FDA, government agency is doing the review, but in the EU, it's going to be a third party that you hire. So it's rule-based classification, but also it's based on risk. All classes except the lowest classification, the lowest risk, require notified body involvement. You'll submit technical documentation. It used to be called technical file, but you'll do a technical documentation submission that will get reviewed. If you're located outside of the EU, you're going to need an authorized representative, and then they are also rolling out a database. It's called Udemy, which has different parts to it. One is the registration of the manufacturer, of the company, of the different actors too, not distributors, but authorized reps have to be in the database. And then you also list your devices, and then also adverse event reporting will be a part of it as well. It's not fully implemented yet, so it's still, parts of it are still voluntary at this point, but that's a change that's coming.
Is the UK kind of following this though, or they fully separate out from this?
They are in the process of it, so you do have to, they're already beginning to, you have to register with them. So yeah, they've already started that process. So yeah, that's a good point I wanted to bring up. So UK and Switzerland, you have to have authorized reps for those separately as well. So you end up, if you're in
Norway also, or just is Norway following the EU stuff?
Yeah, no, they're probably, yeah. Yeah, so you end up with the three.
So about virtual manufacturing, you talked about earlier,
Oh,
is it only limited to certain classes? This is pretty much white labeling. Just whether the product goes.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on how much you're doing, so you'd be, you could be a specification developer, or you could be, private label, yeah, there's some people who just put their name on it, right? Somebody else is manufacturing it completely and they only put their name on it. But, it's basically, they become whoever's putting their name on it is the legal manufacturer, so they hold the responsibility and they have to make sure they're ultimately responsible. So even if you have somebody making it for you, you have to make sure that they're doing everything. So that's why you still have to have your purchasing controls and your supplier controls. And that's a good point. I want to bring up that you want to make sure you have really good quality agreements that outline exactly who's doing what, who's responsible for what, especially like, you have some post-market activities like adverse event reporting. If you have somebody who got hurt and you have to report it, who's going to do that? Are you going to do that? You might not hear about it right away, but your manufacturer probably heard about it, the subcontractor. So who's going to do the reporting? You want to have that documented in a contract that they have to let you know, and you have to, you want to put in the timeframes and all that. But yeah, you definitely want to document all the responsibilities and have that. I have it very clear who's doing what.
I see. Thank you.
So for EU classification, so they have essentially 4 main categories. This is class 1, which is low risk, non-invasive. Under class 1, though, you also now they have, so under MDR, they now have measuring function, reusable and sterile. Those actually are higher risk, but they're still in the class 1. Class 2A is your medium risk. Generally, like if it goes in the body, it's under 30 days. Class 2B is a little bit higher risk. And then class 3 is your highest risk device. And then they have different rules for that, basically on, invasiveness and whether it has power, whether it's an active device. So software falls under active. And then they also have some special rules, some products that don't really fall under any of the other categories. So basically, you're going to pick your class of product, and then you're going to select which rule applies. And that's how that will determine, you have to put that on your declaration of conformity and all that. And then there's a nice guidance document on classification. It has some examples. So the technical documentation for your CE marking looks like you're going to have a cover letter with your company information and some different sections like device description, labeling, design, manufacturing information. The general safety and performance requirements, there's a whole section in the regulation that exactly shows what they're looking for, and generally, so that'll actually usually be a checklist. So you just go through the checklist and include that. And then a benefit risk analysis and risk management, and your V&V activities, your clinical evaluation report, and then also post-market surveillance plan and report if you already have that, but at least the plan. Like if it's a new device, you're not going to have a report yet because you don't have any post-market information yet. So, but you want to show that you have a plan for how you're going to collect that. So those are basically the sections for the EU for submission. So 13485, quality management system. Again, so these are the main sections under the standard. You have management responsibility, which includes things like management review, resource management, product realization, basically includes everything from design control to, to service. And then also measurement analysis improvement has a non-conforming product in your CAPA under that. So again, very similar to Part 820, there's a lot of overlap. So there's a lot of things out there that show you where the gaps are, and shows cross-reference between the two. Of course, it's worth talking about rest of world. That's generally, it's, countries that are considered rest of world or outside of the US or EU, or at least outside of major markets. Most of the time, you're going to need an in-country representative. That could be an independent person, or you can choose to have a distributor. A lot of distributors will act as an authorized rep. The thing you want to be careful about is that depending on the country, sometimes you can't have multiple distributors. And also if you're, say you have a distributor that's not performing and you want to switch distributors, well, they're the license holder in that country and you have to convince them to relinquish it basically, and they may not want to. So, but usually the distributor will cover the costs a lot of times. So that's why a lot of companies, small companies especially, will go with a distributor model for that. So you have to do your due diligence ahead of time and try to pick good distributors. But there's also, there's different companies that are that handle regulatory, that are in different, have offices and partners around the world. That can also be your independent representative. So you can also choose to go that way. So market clearance for from the US or the EU often allows for expedited pathway. So that's why most companies will go first, either get market authorization in the US or the EU. Most markets, so that's one thing. Once you have a 510K, if you don't ever change the device, that's, you have your 510K. But in other countries, you have to, it's a license or registration. You generally have to renew it. I mean, essentially, the US kind of has that as well, in that you have to, pay your annual registration fee, but it's a little bit different because when it's a registration or license renewal, you have to, there's a bunch of documentation usually you have to provide all over again.
Is there any prior authorization for a big software update? Because I figure the initial one would already have been cleared, but then you make a big change. Would that consider more authors? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in particular, like I can speak to, like, for instance, the US FDA, if you change your operating system, you're going to have to do another 510K. But yeah, it depends. But that's a part of, anytime you make a change, you have to do a regulatory assessment to see if it pushes you over into what's considered a major change or a significant change. And the EU has that as well. So yeah, it's an ongoing maintenance thing that you have to go through. That's why some products, you kind of hesitate touching it, but software, you don't really have a choice, I mean, it's constantly, you have to constantly update and make changes. So yeah, different landscape, definitely. There's some harmonization as far as device classification goes. I'm finding that most of them are based on EU. But then you have, for instance, Asia actually has, but it's still similar. It's class A through D, and A is your lowest class and D is your highest. So it's still kind of the same in that it has the 4 classifications, but it's not, 1 through 3. It's A through D. And so part of the fun of doing international is that certain documents have to be legalized. So that will add to your time frame of getting everything together and trying to get it through the process to get your license or your registration, because sometimes that can take a couple months, because certain documents, they'll have to go to the Department of State, and then they may have to go to the embassy for legalization, and this whole process, it can take some time. So you have to factor that in if a lot of times there's sales plan that's been figured out, and so you have to factor that in and let people know as early as possible that yeah, maybe it's going to take a few months longer than expected. Also, translations are a consideration. Yeah, a lot of the EU countries, English, there's a lot of places in the world where English is okay, especially if the end user is a professional, if they are a doctor, as opposed to if it's, the patient. So that makes a difference. But yeah, some places everything has to be translated. Again, a lot of times a distributor, if you're with a distributor, the distributor will take care of that. Sometimes like a user manual can be more work. Sometimes you have to take that on. So that's a consideration there. Let's see. So just overall, some business considerations. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't know reimbursement that well. But I do know we had
a presentation on it.
we had a presentation
And it's
on
recorded.
it. It's recorded. Yep, it's available online. So I invite everybody to take a look at that. But definitely, this also depends on where you're going. So if you're in the U.S., definitely you want to be looking at reimbursement as a part of your regulatory strategy. Rest of the world, it's not going to be, some places don't, you're going to be talking about things like tenders and winning contracts rather than reimbursement. So really depends on where you're going. But in the U.S., you want to consider reimbursement. Decide on what the company's activities will be versus what you're going to outsource. Manage expectations of any VCs, investors, your board of directors that you may have, because they may want to have some confidence that you can do regulatory. So they may ask for, an early, almost, I want to call it proof of concept, even if you're not going to be putting it on the market, can you actually get it through? It's almost like validating the regulatory strategy. And you want to evaluate opportunities for partnership or collaboration depending on your device. Maybe it works with other products, and maybe there's some partnership opportunities there. And maybe you can also leverage some of their resources. Want to decide on your sales and distribution channels, and absolutely you want to apply risk management process throughout your organization. Common pitfalls, just some of them are, for sure not starting regulatory planning early in development, starting too late with documenting and setting up your quality system, like I talked about earlier. Not conducting market analysis, identifying exactly who your customer is, infrastructure needed, because, it's getting back in the day, like not everybody had, or there's still places where internet's not very robust. You're assuming everybody has connection, but then you run into some places globally where, you have to, that's not going to work. So you definitely want to understand the market you're going into. Some of them are still using some older technology, which nothing wrong with that. But if your product is working with a newer version than they're using, that's not going to be the market for you. Big one is underestimating the time, level of effort, money needed for regulatory, and also not keeping up with regulatory changes that will have an impact, because the regs are changing all the time. There's always new standards being applied and just new come in place, and you can, like, for instance, when Japan required usability and cybersecurity in April of last year, a lot of people were behind on that and had to kind of scramble, because it was like, okay, you're either compliant by April 1st or that's it. So, and that included products that were already on the market. So you had the risk of having to stop selling in that country. Mm-hmm. So it's something that you have to, keep an eye on. And then, yeah, so not planning on, for ongoing regulatory activities. So a lot of people, get excited about, getting that, getting their registration, their license, their 510K. The 510K is fine, but a lot of people, especially if there's job changes, people come and go, and whoever was paying attention to the renewals, it's not, there isn't a system in place to keep track of it, and it gets, all of a sudden you lose your license. So like, for instance, Health Canada has annual renewals. It's not a big deal. It's pretty easy to do, but you do have to do it. Otherwise you lose your license. So yep. So those are regulatory activity. It doesn't end. Product is released. You still have a lot of post-market surveillance activities, for instance, and you want to just keep on top of changing regulations. And I mean, other things that I haven't even talked about is other things. So the AI Act in the EU, it's not specifically for medical devices. It's much broader than, it's coming down in the next couple of years. So it's something that we already have to start looking at. Data protection, GDPR in the EU. California has its own version. These are things that impact if you have products where you have, where you're taking in people's information. So they're not necessarily medical device specific. So there's all these other regulations you also have to keep an eye on and comply with. So just some resources out there that I know I've used or I've been, part of these organizations. American Society for Quality has a medical device division. I think they have a few divisions as well. The Regulatory Affairs Professional Society is a great resource. They have a very nice forum as well. And then there's Amy, which also does standards. And then for clinical, there's SOPRA. And then also INCOSI actually had a very interesting healthcare conference that they do. And they had a very nice cybersecurity track. So that's also one to keep an eye on. I've gone ahead and included some of the FDA resources that we've talked about. FDA, the CDRH has a very good platform for with learning modules on different topics. And then they also have quite a few databases for different things. There's a whole 510K database if you want to explore the different products in there. We took a look at the consensus standards, and they also have one for, adverse events is MAUD. And then also, if you have general questions, they're very helpful. DICE. If you don't have, if you have more general questions, they're great people to, ask questions of. And then for the EU, we have a couple of resources. I've included the regulation and the website for UTMED. And also, there's really great guidance documents from the Medical Device Consortium group. And then also, so globally, a lot of countries are looking at IMDRF, which is the global organization. It has all the, a lot of country participants that are working on regulations. They also have a lot of guidance documents, and they have some of the definitions that everybody is trying to align with. So that's another resource. Also, the company that I work with as a consultant, Medicept, we have a lot of white papers and insights, which are basically shorter pieces. I helped write some of them. So a lot of great information, and if you want to follow them on LinkedIn, They're always constantly putting out little announcements and information. So might as well check it out. It's great information. They're always trying to keep up on the latest changes. So anyways, thank you. And I'd like to open it up for Q&A if there's anything else.
You had a device on iPhone, I think you were talking about this, and so you got new OSs coming out all the time. You're saying you have to redo the 510, or you just update the 510? So is it a new application fee every time you get a new OS?
Well, I mean, it depends on how major of a change it is. It really depends. I mean, are we talking about a large, change to the OS? I mean, like,
So what if
If it's
the software update,
10 to
the
1.
software, you have to update the software to accommodate the new operating system, I think. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So do they have to, when they update the software just to accommodate the OS, do they have to file new paperwork?
well, I mean, generally, they're just minor changes, right, to the OS. So no, not those don't. For instance, security patches, a lot of times the updates are security patches. No, FDA doesn't want to see a 510K on that. They're not worried about that. It's if there's a major change.
Like a functional change? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks.